topics in this paper are research methods, criminal psychology and sleep and dreaming. Now paper 2 is slightly different to paper 1 because you'll find there are other sections in there that you do not answer. So when you open the paper, the first section you'll see is research methods, so you answer all the questions on research methods. And then for the other two sections, you must find them in the paper, you must mark at the top of the section that you are doing it, and a little box there'll be a cross to tick, or put a cross in, and then you answer all the questions in that section. The other sections we have not studied, you just leave blank, do not write anything in these sections. The examiner will know what ones you've answered because you only would have answered the two that have been selected by the school for you to have learnt and therefore you to have answered. Within the research method section, it will finish with a 12-mark question. Generally, the 12-mark question will be based on one of the topics in the yellow boxes. For this, you need to make sure you can write 4 marks worth of defining it. So tell me what it is. So it's observations, define the term observations, tell me what the different types of observations are. Then you need to say how the scenario is showing the observation being used, or how it's using a questionnaire, or how it's using a sampling, whatever the key term is, you need to show me how that is being used in the scenario. So take out key phrases or key terms to show it's being used. Then in your third section, you would then say the strengths and weaknesses of the method. By this, you say one strength it is, and then say why it's a strength and link it to the scenario. And then generally you'll finish with a statement or a little paragraph saying actually overall how effective do you think that method is. So read the scenario first, look for the method in the question sentence. If you're not sure on the scenario, just write 4 marks about the method and that will still give you some marks from the question. As well as the knowledge that you need for research methods, that's on the previous slide, you also need to be able to do your math skills and apply those math skills to psychological scenarios where you get given a set of numbers. Don't get too caught up in the scenario, just focus on the numbers. Make sure when you are doing this, you are showing your workings out. So there's normally, if it's a 2-mark question, it'll be 1 mark for the workings out and 1 mark for the actual answer. And also check if it's a decimal point, how many decimal places does it need to be written to. So always worth just double reading the question to make sure you know exactly what's expected of you and you know if you need to show your workings out as well. Also, once you've done your workings out, make sure you write your answer clearly on the line where it asks you to write your answer. It is very common to get a question relating to graphs, so it could be again about making a conclusion from a graph or using a graph to back up a conclusion that's been made. So if we generally be referring to the type of correlation, if it's a correlational based graph, or just interpreting the numbers by reading the different axes. You often get asked to complete a graph as well. So remember, if it is a bar chart or a scatter diagram, think about have you labelled the axes, have you got a title, and have you been really accurate of how you've plotted that graph. Always worth taking your time on this to make sure you are being accurate and you have got everything labelled, so always double check title, both axes, scale, and that the data has been marked properly. The main theories of crime start with the genetic explanation of crime. So in this we are looking at the link generally between twin studies in terms of what are the percentages between monozygotic and dizygotic twins. So you need to have one study and the percentages for that you can refer to, and you're referring to the increased rate between monozygotic twins compared to dizygotic twins, but obviously in terms of evaluating it, we know that's never 100%, therefore that's a point you can always refer to. Operant conditioning definitions, remember positive is you are adding something to a situation, negative means you're taking something away from the situation, reinforcement is to make the behaviour happen again, punishment is to stop the behaviour from happening. So positive reinforcement is adding something good to make the behaviour happen again, negative reinforcement is taking away something bad to make the behaviour happen again. Positive punishment is generally adding something bad to stop the behaviour happening again, and negative punishment is taking away something good to stop the behaviour happening again. Social learning theory, we look at the process of thinking. So once a role model has been observed, the person who's seen that will pay attention to it. They'll have to retain it, so they have to remember the action. Reproduction, will they have the skills to copy that behaviour? And the key point is motivation. So do they actually want to copy the behaviour? If they do have the motivation to copy it, then identification is they then show that behaviour themselves. And obviously if that is a criminal behaviour they've watched, that's how they can become a criminal. Next we have I-linked personality theory. So this was analysing people's personality traits, and those who are seen to have a high level of psychoticism, so lacking empathy, and not feeling guilt, those who had high levels of extroversion, so very outgoing and sensation seeking, and those with high levels of neuroticism, so or unstable and reacted quickly, they were ones who are most likely to be criminals. Remember, for these, you do need to be knowing strengths and weaknesses, so if there's research to support it, what crimes can it explain, what crimes can it not explain, you need to know those as well, but they are all on the revision PowerPoint for you to look at. In terms of treatment of criminals and punishments, you need to know the definition of all of these. So what is this in prison, community sentencing and restorative justice? You then need to be able to, what is important, are the recidivism rates. So how many of people who experience these go back to committing crime afterwards? And then you need to know the strengths and weaknesses. Strengths and weaknesses are linked to how severe is the punishment, the impact it has on society, and again, what are the recidivism rates. Key point to remember with restorative justice is that it goes alongside prison or community service. It's not a standalone punishment by itself, so it would have to be linked to one of the others. And when you're looking at the figures for restorative justice, people have to agree to take part. So if it's an offender agreeing to take part, maybe they already feel remorseful, that's maybe why the statistics are so positive for it. So an extra evaluation point there for restorative justice. Final bit of information for criminal psychology is the 4 points on the screen in front of you. So anger management is the same process as CBT, so you should know this quite well by now in terms of that functional analysis at the start, looking at what makes them angry, what are their triggers. The skills training will be breathing techniques, how to calm themselves down, how to control that anger, and then they'll role play and they'll go and practice the skills as homework, and they'll repeat this over time to see if they can change their behaviour. Token economies are used in prisons to be able to give people rewards for their good behaviour, to hopefully encourage that and change their behaviour long term. Both of those you need to know evaluation points for in terms of how effective are they, how realistic are they, and that real life application behind it. The two studies for criminal psychology are Cholton and Bandura, Ross and Ross. Cholton was the TV on a remote island where they introduced TV to see if it impacted behaviour over a 5-year period. Key thing here with this one is that they didn't actually find a change in behaviour. They did a series of comparisons in which only 9 showed differences, but 5 showed an improvement, 4 showed a decrease. So overall, there's no change in behaviour by TV. However, the key point to remember here is it's such a specific location. So because it was an island with very close control, it meant it's very hard to apply to other places, and other places have found different results. Bandura, Ross and Ross was a boba doll experiment where children had to observe an adult playing aggressively with the toy. They then watched to see whether they copied that behaviour or not. So they did find here that there's a copying of behaviour. Boys copied physical aggression, girls copied verbal aggression. But again, in terms of evaluating this, we have issues with it being a lab experiment. So does it apply to real life and everyday situations? And there's also a few ethical questions around teaching children aggressive behaviour. For sleep and dreaming, we need to start by looking at sleep cycle, so sleep onset, late night stage and deep sleep. You need to be able to know what the characteristics are of each stage, so in terms of how easy are we to wake up, what's happening in the brain, what happens to our muscles in terms of are they paralysed or are they able to move. You've also got to remember when you come back out of the cycle, we then have REM sleep, and talk about what REM sleep is in terms of dreaming. And also, as we're talking about the sleep cycle, you can refer to benefits of sleep. So in terms of in deep sleep is where our brain can recover and repair. It gives us body chance to improve our immune system. In sleep in general, it is a real benefit for our health. Our heart gets stronger, our many bodily functions are improved by sleep, so make sure as well as those sleep stages, you can refer to, especially in deep sleep, the benefits of why we have deep sleep. You then also need to refer to biological rhythms, so the different rhythms we have, so circadian and ultradian, circadian being around a day in 24 hours, and ultradian being quicker than a day, so much shorter cycle. So the sleep-wake cycle, waking up, having a day and sleeping, is a 24-hour cycle, but your sleep cycle is 90 minutes, and that's ultradian. So use your examples of sleep to back up your knowledge of different types of rhythms. Next, we need to know the difference between internal and external influences. So internal being from the pineal gland, the fact that when light is detected and we feel awake when it gets dark, we detect darkness and we release melatonin, which makes us feel tired. We then also got to know the impact of other hormones, so cortisol, adrenocorticotropic hormone as well. These make us feel awake, so in terms of if you're playing a video game, the internal impact of this on your body is the release of these chemicals, or if we are feeling stressed. We also need to know external factors such as Zeitgebers and light, that is the main external factor, and you need to be able to evaluate these in terms of the impact on us. So refer to studies such as CEF, which we'll talk about later on. You can talk about the hamster study, who had their SCN removed and then reimplanted, and you can talk about studies done on blind people and how much light perception they have. So you need to understand what the influences are and give a bit of supporting research to show how they have an impact, but also some research to say they don't. The final end of the course is looking at Freud, so looking at the different key terms of Freudian over exam. Is that we have an unconscious, which is where our repressed thoughts go and where our dreams come from. In terms of being able to break down the meaning of a dream, we need to look at the latent content. So the latent content is the meaning, that's what we're trying to find, and to do that we have to break down the manifest content, which is the story of the dream. To break down the story of the dream, to break down that manifest content, we have to look at condensation, which is the many different ideas that appear as one. Displacement, which is the different parts of the dream which may take the focus away from what the actual story is. And the secondary elaboration is what has been added to the story when telling the dream, which therefore makes it unreliable and maybe actually didn't even happen in the dream. So remember, for Freud, when we are analysing this, we can use his own study to support it, but also remember, dream analysis is very subjective, very open to opinion, which makes it very hard to analyse reliably, and also the telling of dreams is very inaccurate, so therefore unable to know what dreams mean as an overall. The two studies for sleep and dreaming are quite straightforward ones to remember compared to some other studies we've done. So CEF spent 6 months in a cave, so I had that removal of natural light. Lots of findings to talk about here in terms of struggle to cut the isolation, but in terms of sleep and dreaming, his sleep-wake cycle varied from 18 to 54 hours. He was unaware of the different lengths of his days, which shows that actually light being an external factor probably does control us to a 24-hour cycle, but there is still some internal body clock, which means we need to sleep and controls that sleep-wake cycle. Not as well, but shows that it's still being controlled. Freud, with little hands, through the use of dream analysis and stories from his parents, showed there is an unconscious. It does show the Oedipus complex, and it does show a fear of the father, so it supported his theories. Both of these are case studies, so because it's a case studies, they both gather lots of data, but they're very hard to generalise to other people because it could have been just the findings that are linked to one person. Specifically for CEF, being done in a cave, it does not link to real life, therefore mean that actually it may be hard to apply to people in a real life situation. And specifically linking to Freud, it's the fact that he did say little hands may be different to other children, therefore the results probably won't apply to other people in the same way they applied to him. There are 3 types of questions that you need to know how to answer in terms of exam technique. So firstly, we have got a trigger question. This is where you have to define the key term and then apply it to the scenario. So if it was asking you about mindset theory, you'd say a growth mindset is, and then you'd tell me exactly what the definition of growth mindset is, and then you say this links to the scenario because, and you would say how that information is seen within the scenario. So taking keywords, phrases, the person's name, and saying what behaviour they show that shows the definition happening. If it's a study, in your first sentence you would put the results of the study, and in the second sentence you'd say how those results are seen in the scenario. When answering an evaluation question, you have to give a really clear piece of evidence first. So no generic statements, it has to be specific. So if you were talking about Sperry, you'd have to say one weakness of Sperry is that only had 11 participants. So make sure you put exact numbers and be incredibly specific with that evaluation point. Don't be generic by saying it just had a small sample size. Make sure you say the exact number or the exact piece of evidence. Then you say this is a weakness because, and you would say why that's a weakness, ideally linking to either generalizability, reliability, applicability, validity, ethics, and quite often sample size comes up, and making sure you then say why that's a weakness. So if you're using the example of Sperry only having 11 participants, this is a weakness because sample size is too small, meaning you're not able to generalize it to, and then talk about the people in the scenario and why not be able to generalize it would be a weakness. When we are doing conclusion questions, so this is going to be, there's going to be a scenario with some kind of data in it, you have to make a clear statement if it is fact. So you say one conclusion is, and then make sure it's a statement. Do not just describe the results, make sure it is a clear statement. Once you've made your clear statement, you're then going to use the data to say, I know this because, and then use that data. So if we took an example of a study where people who are 6 foot had size 12 feet, and people who are 5 foot had size 4 feet, I would say the taller you are, the bigger your feet. That's my statement, and I'll say I know this because those are people who average 6 feet had size 11 feet, those who average 5 feet had size 4 feet. So I've got my clear statement first, and I've got my data to back it up after.